Thank you for joining me on my soapbox today. My name is Mindy Preffling, and I'm the Client Services Senior Manager for Spencer Ogden, a global energy and infrastructure recruitment agency. As global recruitment experts in energy and infrastructure, we're building an industry that impacts millions. We provide leading recruitment services to our clients and candidates, creating careers to power a sustainable future. The Soapbox Series is a podcast we've launched to have open discussions with thought leaders in the renewable energy industry to discuss the human element behind our industry and the challenges we face in recruiting, retaining, and promoting top talent, especially as it pertains to diversity, equity, and inclusion. My guest today is Jade Scheele, the Head of Development for Steelhead Americas. Steelhead is the development arm for Vestas, the global market leader in wind turbine manufacturing, installation, and services. Steelhead leverages Vestas's latest turbine technology and leading service operations to advance development in new and existing markets. Steelhead's goal is to drive a more sustainable future led by renewable energy. On today's episode, Jade and I discuss all things development. Jade takes her time to share her quote nuggets of wisdom with our listeners, focusing on her best advice for developers who are just starting their journey, the importance of welcoming feedback, and how the key to overcoming the struggles of the pandemic is to embrace the virtual environment. We also touch on Steelhead's approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion, making this a well-rounded and informative addition to the Soapbox series. All right, Jade, thank you so much for joining me today on my soapbox. To kick us off, I'd love for you to give us a brief introduction to you and to Steelhead Americas.
Sure. And thanks for having me, Mindy. It's a pleasure to step outside my comfort zone every once in a while. So my name is Jade Scheele, and I work for Steelhead Americas, which is the development arm for Vestas. Most people know who Vestas is. That's not a new name, but Steelhead has been around since 2015, more as a quiet participant in the industry. And since the last few years, we've taken a much more active role in development, and I can get into details a little bit later. First, though, an introduction to who I am. I come as a developer with 12 years of experience, which I have to pause every time I say that because I still feel young at heart. But it has given me the benefit of seeing the industry transform into what it is today. I started my career in wind development in Austin, Texas at Cielo Wind Power. So I was there for 6 years. And then I joined Apex Clean Energy in Charlottesville, Virginia, before coming here to Steelhead in February of 2020, right before COVID changed our worlds.
Great. Thank you for that background. Okay, so you've been in development for the past 12 years. Is that actually, I guess my question is, how did you get started in development?
I was lucky to always know that I wanted to be in renewable energy in some form, and project management in general just was a natural fit for me. My father was in construction, my whole family, my brothers, they've always been in construction. And after college, I found myself being a surveyor for a few years. Had this very random offshoot to be a restaurant manager in Nashville, but I mean, I learned my chaos management in that. But as far as how I fit for the developer role, I just sort of had that natural direction to project management. And so when I moved to Austin, it was right during the sort of economic downturn, the 2008 economic downturn. And my now husband, but boyfriend at the time, didn't know what we wanted to do with our lives. And so we just moved there with our 2 dogs and no jobs. And I found myself walking into Cielo's office with my resume and portfolio of what I figured were accomplishments. And I just happened to be at the right place at the right time because they were looking for somebody to be a road warrior and you know, do the development work for the projects that they were working on. So that's really where I got my start.
So you like
And it just sort
literally
of grew from there.
you literally just like walked into it.
I literally walked into it. Yes. Yeah. And it was, thank goodness for Melissa Miller, who is a longtime Austin renewable energy phenomenal woman. She said, "Oh, this girl's hungry. Let's hire her for a very cheap amount of money and get a lot of work out of her." Yeah, so it was fun. It was really fun.
Okay, so you've worked for 3 different companies, which is pretty impressive in this day and age when most people aren't keeping jobs for 4, 5, 6 years anymore. Talk to me about your journey from Cielo to Apex and now to Vestas.
My dedication to my profession has really led me into making sure that the companies I am with, you know, I'm really believe in what we're trying to accomplish, and I feel like even if it's a trying environment for the, you know, we all don't like our jobs sometimes, but I always keep kind of a North Star of what I know that that company and I can mutually do for one another. And I can say that this is also what I tell my developers here. I had a professional growth goal, and I knew that with the company that I was with, either be Cielo or Apex, they too had a particular offering of which we could mutually benefit one another. And when you come to the end of that, there's no hard feelings. It's just that you've now maxed out the, you know, in your growth or your professional trajectory, you've maxed out the alignment with that company. And I, you know, I really appreciated all that Cielo did for me as a professional to learn and grow. Similarly with Apex, that was a really, you know, I very much applaud and continue to cheer them on, and under the leadership of Carlos and Mark and everybody. So to me, again, it's more that we all have an individual professional growth journey, and if the company is supporting it and is there's an alignment there, then you know you stick to it as long as you can, and there's no hard feelings when that now diverges.
Okay, so I'm curious because in project development, you can take different routes in your career, as I understand it. You can stay as an individual contributor, or you can take the path of leadership. And you've taken the path of leadership. When did you start that? Was that with Steelhead, or were you in a leadership role with Apex?
Apex. And my goal, that was one of the things that, you know, I speak of the divergence is Cielo was a small team, and I wanted to learn how to be a team leader. And I knew that even though I had skills as an individual contributor, that next jump is a completely different skill set to become a manager and a leader. And I separate the two because they're both different skill sets. So that's why I was looking for a place like Apex that I could really grow in that area of learning how to lead individuals, be a manager, but also you know, sort of empower and inspire other professionals to grow alongside me.
Yeah. What's the makeup of folks in project development? In, you know, is it mostly men, women? Is it pretty evenly matched? I'm curious what that looks like when you look around the room.
It's not an equal balance of men and women in the room, or you know, even people of racial diversity. I think that you know, the developers have a kind of there is a personality type that I think makes people like being the developer. I mean, you know, you can have a lot of different skill sets as a developer. You can be really effective on the ground in the community. You know, getting the talking with the local stakeholders and local decision makers in the land, or you can be the person who really understands the commercial aspect and power prices and how to go find. I mean, we sort of have a wide talent pool, if you will, as far as what you can do, and you can still be a successful developer. But I do think that those who really like development, who really like being in it, have a couple of traits that maybe don't make it as conducive to a wide berth of candidates. For instance, we travel a lot. And I think that that's a very, sort of a decision point for, males, females, in that sometimes we have to make the decision, are we going to be travelers, or do we want to focus more on not traveling and our families and, being at home? And I think that I'm not typecasting at all. It's just, it definitely is one of those things that you question about your work-life balance and what's most important. And it's just very difficult to be an effective developer and not travel.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit, you and I, and I'm curious with COVID, since you've joined Vestas really, since it kind of happened at the same time, have you noticed any changes in the industry with travel expectations? And
I'd like to say yes. I think there was a pause when everyone was trying to figure out and assess how to be safe, how to conduct business in the new virtual environment. But what we found is that those who were willing to, that the communities that we're going into are still, they had a different perspective on COVID than some other than the corporate companies did. And so they still really were not going to resonate with you unless you were in the community face to face with them. There's a tremendous trust component to being successful as a developer, and to have trust, to gain trust, to build it in a community, you have to have physical presence. And so has it changed for me or for developers having to go out there? No. But what I do think it has changed for the better is our strategic ideas that we had to be the ones out there. We don't have to be the ones out there. There are individuals in each of these communities that are excited and interested in being a part of this new, the development and a project. How do we find those people and hire them or empower them, but create a relationship so that they can be the ones we're giving back to the community in a different way? And I think there are certain developers that have really embraced that, and so it actually has, I guess, lightened the concern on so much travel.
yeah, I see what you're saying. So the project developer still needs to have presence, go out to site, on a regular basis, but maybe not as often if somebody could be there as a proxy to help with the relationship management of the local stakeholders and community. Yeah, it sounds reasonable to me anyway, but I know that sometimes in practice, it's not as easy because you need to find the right people to be able to do that. And not everybody is as skilled on the relationship management piece. That's a skill you can't really teach. It's something that you have or you don't.
Yeah. It's definitely, like I said, I think it's a new emerging kind of strategy that people are working on. But at the same time, it's the tried and true way is for us to be out there in the community and learning about the community ourselves.
Yeah. So I want to go back, and I started on this a few minutes ago, but I want to talk about your journey into leadership. And so when you joined Apex, that gave you the opportunity to be in a management role, which you didn't have at CLO. How did that go for you? How was that transition from being an individual contributor to being a manager for you?
Yeah, it's bumpy. It's the best way I can explain it, because all of a sudden you're dealing with you're wanting to enable and empower personalities that are not your own, and learning how to communicate where you're not offending or backtracking, right? Or how do you communicate with individuals that resonate with different ways of management, right? So for this person, they really like to have direct communication and kind of maybe even spell things out for them, whereas this other person wants to be a lone wolf and just, you tell them the end result, and they want to just go at their own pace or their own style or whatnot. And which one do I do more effective? It was a lot of a learning journey for myself, as like knowing my own personal, the way I like to be managed, like what kind of a, management style am I compatible with? And then how do I interpret and learn about the other individuals of which I'm, trying to support and influence, or, trying to support, and what really drives them, what inspires them to succeed. And then, and then how do you know a person who just doesn't care at all? Like, is it you that failed them, or is it them that failed them? And yeah. I don't know if that is, necessarily something to focus on, but there are those individuals who, anyway. So it was a learning curve, I would say, in trying to figure out what all this meant for me, and then for me to find the voice that was Jade, right? What was really and even though it changes for the individuals, it still had to be a consistent and authentic voice. And so getting to that point was bumpy. I made some pretty, like, I could tell that I did something and it didn't resonate very well. Right. And so I had some face plants anyway. And then when I got to be a leader of a team, an actual, like, several person team, I really was able to kind of put my practice into, to actual techniques.
Yeah, I had a really similar experience. I know there's like a bunch of books and people talk about how difficult management is, and you don't really know until you're in that seat and you're managing people. And yeah, I had a really similar experience when I first started managing, that it was, yeah, bumpy, I think is maybe a nice word to use. And, I look back on that person that I was, and I'm really grateful that I stuck with it, because I think it would have been really easy to just be like, you know what, that was hard. This is hard. I don't want to keep doing this, because I'm a great individual contributor. I know how to do my job and I can do it well. So why challenge myself? But then I guess that's when we grow, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we're failing often.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
if you persevere through it, it can be really rewarding.
Exactly. Yeah. And we kind of talked about, I do think that there is a difference between leadership and management, in the sense that, leadership is something that you provide to your team in the consistent, like consistent North Star, and how well you're empowering your team to that North Star is really how effective of a leader you are. That's kind of, when I'm checking in with myself, how am I working on my team to get them to that North Star. Management, I see as, how are we dealing with the personalities, and the kind of the more nuts and bolts of teamwork, and just making sure that we are dealing with conflict, and that individuals have a place to voice their concerns and feel heard. And so I guess I sort of differentiate the two, even though they're very intertwined, don't get me wrong, but I initially alluded to two very different skill sets. Being able to continue to inspire and make sure they're hitting their professional growth goals, and that the team is, succeeding and having that inspirational place. And then, like, the nitty gritty of, the day to day, if you will.
Yeah, like the leadership is very personal, and it's almost how you brand yourself as a leader to a group, whereas management is more corporate. Like, are you hitting your KPIs? Did you do this task that you were supposed to get done? Are you meeting your deadlines, or whatever the case may be? Is that?
And how is work-life balance for your team? Like, that's a big one with COVID, right?
So how have you evolved as a leader and a manager over the years? Like, now that you're at Vestas, I want to get into your team in a moment here, but I'm curious, how, how you're feeling in your leadership and your management now as the director of development at Vestas?
It's always a journey. I mean, you can always improve. And I think I did get to really benefit from having those face plants and learning from them. But I face plant today too. It's not without knowing that there are definitely always ways to improve. And so I really think that the one I guess tool that I lean on consistently is the feedback loop from my peers or my team to me, my peers, and that to me is really important. Is as harsh or as wonderful as feedback can be, it needs to happen.
Yeah.
So I think in my role right now, that our team, Steelhead in general, is really focusing on the things that make us a team or a family. And a big component of that is, honest feedback, challenging one another's, statements, and having that very positive rapport that can be also that and respect across the team for everybody's individual professional acumen, but also being able to take that question that challenges your statement. I think it's just the leadership team here at Steelhead in general has embraced that and find that it's very important to continue to keep that in our culture.
Mm-hmm. So I want to talk more about Steelhead because your team, for all intents and purposes, is very new. And Steelhead, I don't know if you would consider yourself startup anymore, but 7 years old in the world of development isn't too old. And I know your team has grown quite a bit the last 2 years. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about Steelhead. What's Steelhead doing in the market?
Yes. Enough about you, Jade.
No, we're going to come back. Don't you worry.
No, I don't want to talk about you. I would love to talk about Steelhead. It's been around since 2015. That's when it was formed. But in 2020, I was employee number 9. So it just shows there was a time in Steelhead's infancy, if you will, where they were focusing more on partnerships with other developers, leveraging PTC components and becoming a JV partner. And so really, technically, we're much younger than 2015. And we really took off in our greenfield origination and project development in 2019, when we had about a 1.5 gigawatts maybe of projects that they had acquired from a res partnership. And then since then, we are now 30 people strong. So I was person number 9 in 2020, and now we're 30 people. And then we have about 3 gigawatts in development in our pipeline right now. And we've actually transacted on about 500 megawatts since I've started. So that has been replenished, or I don't consider those in our current pipeline. So we're not just a developer, greenfield developer. We also continue to have our production tax credit enablers that we form with a JV partner and contribute our components. And so through both of those, project sales, and as well as JV partnerships, we actually enabled over 1.2 gigawatts of wind turbine sales for Vestas last year. That was we had a really busy year. And that's really kind of, if you're wondering what Steelhead is, it is an enabler for, making sure our projects are deployed with Vestas technology, as well as Vestas understanding what the market's needs are. Mm-hmm. So there is a very organic and compatible feedback loop that we get to say, these are the development constraints that a turbine can address. And then here we have these projects, the Vestas compatibility is pretty organic. We also, though, have been able to, through this PTC angle, done a few different creative financing ourselves. So there's a mix on the Steelhead team. It's not just my side of the fence, which is execution. We have these other commercial components, and we just added a financing component as well, leveraging Vestas capital, if you will, to the options. So I think that, to sum it up, it's a variety of things that we are trying to support the end all be all goal of, seeing this world become a more sustainable and green place.
So I've gotten this pushback, and I'll ask this question and we don't have to keep it, but I'm curious because Vestas is an OEM, right? Started as an OEM and then started Steelhead, however many years later. And the pushback I've received from folks in the market is that isn't Steelhead competing with Vestas clients or customers?
Yeah, that is a very common question that we receive. And I will be honest, it was one of the things that I asked in my interview. The truth of the matter is that we are just treated like any other developer. And the caveat is that we have to use Vestas turbines. So are we more competitive or are we less competitive? That's the question.
That's an interesting point. Didn't think of it that way.
You can keep that question.
Thank you. So I want to talk about your team, because you've got a pretty great team that you've built. I mean, what you said, you grew in the last 2 years from 9 to 30 people. Growing a team from 9 to 30 in the best of times is no easy feat. And you did it in 2020, right when COVID hit and you had to move to a virtual workforce. And, you probably had quite a bit of pressure from Vestas and Steelhead, and you had a baby during that time. Yeah. So yeah. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the challenges that you had the last 2 years with growing your team and keeping your head on straight.
Keeping the head on straight is still questionable, and I think any of my team members will attest to that. I mean, no, it was not only was I going to stretch goal to be like from a team lead to then like Chris saying, hey, let's build a team, and then you add on to it, oh yeah, we're now in a pandemic where your ability to travel is now completely, halted for as long as you can. We have no idea. And then how do we hire individuals through and figure out who is going to be the best members of our team when you don't even know who they are, or you can't even meet them in person. So yeah, it was challenging. And I think that what led us to success were a couple of things. First of all, we leaned in to the virtual environment. We, kind of had to do a learning curve with our current team and you have to turn your video on. Because if we don't, there are calls that you are just conference calls, but like for the majority, if it's a team meeting, make a concerted effort if you can. We understand, we are now bridging. Home is now work is now home. Like we understand that sometimes there's dogs and cats and kids and everything, partners running around. And so you don't want to have them on video, but we really, all the leaders first had to do it. And then it was, we tried to get our team members to also embrace it. So that was challenge number one. Challenge number two was people didn't need to be in Portland. And that, I think, is still a question in my mind. Am I doing enough to bring the team together in this virtual environment? We leaned in, we embraced it, but I constantly am thinking, can we do more to solidify this team, to draw to make the bridges, to, provide the opportunities for interpersonal relationships on our team. So that's always a journey, but we definitely embraced that it was going to be a journey. And then I think the last thing might have been more like 3 things. Who's counting? Is that we are looking for candidates, and I think candidates who actually are willing, or who are excited to take on this opportunity, have one really strong common thread, and that is we have a solid position in our own why. Why are we doing this? Why am I going to be a part of a renewable energy team? And then on the side of that, I really want to take an active part in building something that is my own, right? And this is each individual. This goes from the origination director or my position all the way to the analyst's position. Across the spectrum is I want to be a piece of doing it right, and not that other industry partners are doing it wrong. It's just, this is a blank slate, and so you get to own your successes and your failures. And so the vindication of your why, that this is really in it for the global good, and we are a part of a global company, and I have an opportunity to really see the implication of my efforts. That's the value proposition that Steelhead has provided to the market. It's not for everyone, and I've lost candidates because of the newness and the potential, the questions. And so it's been a good challenge to have, to continue to, look out to the industry for those individuals. And so we've made it work. And I think everybody is happy.
Yeah.
At least.
Well, that's a good segue to my next question, because kind of you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation just how hot project developers are out there right now. And I can attest to that too. I mean, we've got like 4 or 5 open project developer jobs any given day, and they're not easy to find, especially when you're adding the challenge of we'd like diverse candidates as well. So with that being said, what are you doing to keep folks happy on your team and draw in new folks as you're hiring for yourself and your team?
Yeah, thank you for this question, because it's obviously on top of mind. It is a good time to be a developer, but I think that there's also a certain amount of reflection that the candidates and the individuals out there looking to, change jobs or join other teams, that they really should question, what does being a developer on this team mean? And I think that, to your question, what does it mean to be a developer on the Steelhead team? I'm really taking a different approach in how I've structured my team. I actually don't have individuals, team members working by themselves. I have at least 2 developers on every project, partnering, one primary, one secondary, or one lead, one support, to both create that sense of support. They also no single point of failure. So if one of them gets really busy on a closing, then the other one can continue to keep things going. It helps with the flexibility, and I also find that it helps with the morale building and the team building aspect, right? So you want to make sure, or I'm providing for my teammates the opportunity to really learn and augment someone else and learn that teamwork ability. The other thing that I've been really focusing on is the individual growth of each person. And I'll say this as an example of, I have individual developers on my team who have ambitions to be on the operations side of the fence someday. And so I'm really catering their stretch goals and the opportunities of the projects that we have to work on, to rounding out those capabilities, so that they're not starting at ground zero when they decide to make that career shift. In addition, I have people who are really interested in someday in the future having a family and traveling less. We're really working on the management capabilities of that person, and to extend their individual contributor capabilities and talents to others. And as I can attest, that is no easy feat, right? To make a bunch of yous, if you will, or extensions of oneself, and still be able to accomplish great things. And so that is the very specific approach that I'm employing to my team. I'm investing in them, and that's why I hope that there's a reciprocal balance. I also understand that when our, as I mentioned, professional growths are no longer aligned, that they're going to go off and do great things. And I hope that they are as impactful for that person, that company that they went to, as they were here at Steelhead.
So like what I'm hearing is kind of three main topics. Culture, the culture that you're creating, and like it's a culture of collaboration, it's a culture of teamwork where people support each other and nobody's on an island. And then really it sounds like you're taking a like bespoke approach to the individuals on your team where they individually want to develop and grow, and then you're investing your time and energy into supporting them on that growth journey, and then also maybe pulling other resources internally, like, hey, if this isn't the right home for you in Vestas, maybe there's another home, or if you want to grow in challenge yourself in different ways. Not everyone wants to be an individual contributor forever, but they also maybe don't want to be a manager.
That's right.
Yeah. So why try to put them in that box?
Right. Yeah, and on that, I mean, that's the other thing about the Vestas side is it does give you access to staying in the same company but doing something totally different.
Yeah.
And you can also have, if you want to, a international position. And there's constantly succession planning and recruiting happening in the Vestas house itself. I mean, I will say that Vestas, in my 2 years here, they do a lot of things to promote internal talent, and for those who who really are interested in a variety of things.
Yeah, I've worked with Vestas for about 5 years now, and that's always been kind of my number one pitch about Vestas is a lot of the folks you're speaking with have been there 8, 12, 20 years, and they're not necessarily just in the same position that whole time or even in the same department.
Yep,
So
rarely.
yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think that's a major selling point. And it sounds like with what you're doing with your team is you take a very individual approach, and then it sounds like you really empower and inspire, I think it's what you had said earlier, the folks on your team. And I really appreciate that support piece at the end of the road in your, like career together, be that at Vestas or wherever. And you know what? I understand this isn't your forever home, and I support you where you're going to next. Like, it's a small industry, it's a small world. Let's agree that this isn't the right place for you now, and that's okay.
And we're all fighting for the same reason, right? We're all trying to do renewable energy development, or we're all trying to make address climate change and make this a sustainable world. And so we're all batting for the same team. I have no problem with investing my time in someone who I know is going to go somewhere else and do that and even better, right? It's just it's like I now have impacted something external to our own team here, our own
Yeah.
company.
I've never thought of it that way. I work in such a competitive industry. It's not necessarily the same, but you're absolutely right. Like we're all pulling on the same rope here. Like, like more power to you wherever you go, and I'm sure we'll meet again.
Yes, yeah.
On
Don't
another
get me wrong.
project.
I feel bad when I lose a candidate that I want to, right? But I think that maybe is how you can. I definitely think of it. And back to the management. I sit on a team of four leaders, leadership team, and I think we all share that perspective of making sure inquiring about an individual and their interests and how we can help them continue to grow professionally, and so gain their exposure into various areas in a initially soft but then more concentrated time.
So I want to talk a little bit more about your team, because I've worked with you and your team the last year and some change. So I have perspective on what your team makeup is, but if you could just break it down for us, how big is your team, and what's the makeup of your team? You know, like junior, more senior, yeah.
So on my team specifically with the developers, or Steelhead in general?
Let's talk about Steelhead.
Yeah.
Kind of see what that looks like.
Yeah, Steelhead there's 30 of us, but we come from a variety of different, not, a very few of us actually come from traditional development shops like Pattern and Nextera, Invenergy, EDPR. A lot of the team has renewable experience, but not necessarily direct development experience. And I appreciate that, because we are trying to look at the industry in different ways, different creative ways. And sometimes when you've been in the box for so long, you forget how to think outside the box. So that is one thing. The other thing that we have, which is wonderful, and we celebrate it constantly, is we have 10 different nationalities that are not North America based. And that to me has just been a really fun, colorful, way to take on every day.
So do you have any ideas for the industry on how we can increase diversity? I mean, not just for developers, but obviously the industry is growing rapidly. So there's going to be opportunities for new folks to come in. So what can we do as an industry to increase diversity?
Well, I think that the first thing that the industry has to do is, there's a couple ideas that I have, but I think that the first thing is that the industry has to agree that diversity is an inherent good. And I have to get the credit of that quote to my colleague, Chelsea Stone. But when she said that, it was like, it made so much sense. The industry has to become aligned in the fact that diversity is an inherent good. And once we grasp that as an industry, and it's not just our industry, it's not just the power industry, we're all talking about this, and we're all trying to wrap our minds around what it means for us as our own teams, us as a company, me as an individual. How do I look at it? How do I define it? And then after that, I do think what we can do in the development space or the renewable space is really start at the place where individuals become interested in our industry and our profession. So I fell into this industry, right? And I somehow decided that I was going to be a developer. Well, how can we make that more intentional? How can we support the graduates, the college, get more programs in the college, increase our exposure to those who are trying to make a decision on what they want to do with their lives or their careers, and empower that, support it. But we're not going to see this change overnight. How we continue to attract diverse individuals is that I don't have an answer for.
Yeah.
Besides what I said about being a leader who is focused on the individual, not you conform to me, I'm going to conform to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to conform to what's going to help you grow as a professional. I think if there's more of that type of leadership, then you'll see you'll see a much more interest from people who need to who may not have considered coming into a traditionally white male industry.
Yeah. So I feel like the concept, what can I do for you as a leader, manager, what have you, versus what can you do for me as my employee is a paradigm shift that came from diverse perspectives, came from, well, dare I say it, from women. And I that's what I think, because I couldn't agree with you more. And actually I talked about that, not to plug my own podcast, but when I I guess interviewed Kristen Graff from Rise, and she talks a lot about that, because it permeates beyond just the workspace, what you're coming in to do on a day-to-day basis. And especially now in working in a more virtual world, you said it earlier, our work is we work in our
Home.
homes. Yeah, and it's all
Sure.
just kind of blending together now. So how can we create synergies so that people feel more safe being themselves at work? And it goes beyond just like, how do we create a more diverse workspace? How do we create a more diverse work culture? It's more about, like, I don't know, it's kind of like just a whole inclusive idea behind like how we go about hiring people and retaining them. So before we wrap up our show, I have one more question for you, because I feel like we could just keep going on for hours. But I think it would be helpful for our listeners to hear from you on if you had any advice for somebody who is looking to become a project developer, maybe in a minority group or otherwise. What advice would you give them?
I think I would say that this is a very fun and always changing industry, or at least particularly as a developer, what I've seen personally is no day is the same. You're always being challenged, but you're also, it's kind of choose your own adventure. You really can go where you want to go with this industry and take it where you want to take it. There's no right way to do anything anymore. At least in my opinion, the status quo is needing to change, and let's be a part of the conversation. Let's, jump in. It just doesn't, you don't have to come in and say, and say that you're here and you're a diverse individual. Embrace that you're an individual that has a different perspective, and that you have an ability to improve this industry in your own way. And you can take that as you want to, but in general, I think the more diverse in all areas that we make this particular effort, this development effort, the more successful we are going to be against those who are trying to stop us. That's
So
what I would
really,
say.
yeah, like really feel empowered by the diversity of thought that you have to bring.
That's right.
I love that. So in closing, first of all, thank you so much for joining. I've really enjoyed our conversation today. I always love talking to you. I want to ask one more question. I know I said that was my last question, but here's really my last question. At the end of my show, I like to run a segment called the What's in It for Me. So why should somebody consider joining Steelhead?
Because we are fun.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, no, we are having fun, but we're serious too about what we're trying to do. And joining Steelhead is like, I think, when I was talking about, you're making your own successes and your failures here. We're small enough. We are a startup mentality, if you will, where you can really make a mark and make a difference. And my challenge is going to be, how do we make that sustainable and when we grow, and how do we scale that kind of culture? But we're trying to do all of the things that we feel will lead to continuing that environment here for individuals to come and succeed, so long as they're willing to take on the challenge.
Great. Well, I know I don't work at Vestas, but my secondhand experience has been that. I think you've got an awesome team of people. I think you're a lot of fun. Really, again, appreciate you joining today and participating in the Soapbox series. And that's all we have for today.
Thank you, Mindy.
Thank you.
Have a
Jade.
great day.
You too.